Eisenhower gave some brilliant advice to JFK that JFK initially did not follow when he became president. And JFK initially did not like President Eisenhower. And so after the inauguration was over, he walked over to Eisenhower and he said, "Well, General, do you have any last bit of advice for me?" And he said, "Yes, be a good butcher."
A neighbor's choice.
Well, I'm here today with my good friend, retired Colonel Douglas Macgregor. How you doing, sir?
Yeah, I'm surviving like everybody else here on the outskirts of Washington.
I just heard from Donald Trump's Truth Social. He's placing the 700 Marines with Colonel Macgregor. He wants you to go down there and face off with
Right.
those rioters. What are you going to do when you get there?
Well, I think the Marines are going to be under somebody else's command.
Yeah. Well, tell us. I wanted to get your take right off the bat. What do you think about these protests and everything, and the response that President Trump has been using?
Well, first of all, I don't think President Trump has done anything unreasonable given the circumstances. If you go back to 1991, 92, and look at the LA riots and President Bush's response to that, it was eminently reasonable. I think what President Trump has done is reasonable. But we're in a different country today. That's more than 30 years ago. And demographically, Los Angeles has changed. I was looking at the statistics. You go back to the early 60s, and Los Angeles was 92% white.
Mhm.
That is of Americans of European ancestry. Today, it's probably about 34 or 33%.
Mhm.
So the city itself has fundamentally changed. We also know that 1.2 million illegals reside inside Los Angeles. And now we have a police chief who has said he's not going to cooperate with law enforcement. You have a mayor that effectively says, "I'm not going to support anything the president wants to do." So it appears that you're dealing with a genuine insurrection, a rebellion against federal authority that is actually encouraged and promoted by the officials in the government of Los Angeles, as well as the governor of Los Angeles. I think in 1861, everyone would have recognized what they were dealing with, a rebellion.
Mhm.
So the question now is, what do we do about it? How do we proceed? And understand some facts. We are divided as a country along racial lines, as well as economic to some extent. How do you deal with this? I don't have an easy answer, but I think we're approaching that point in the history of the country where you have to answer a critical question. Are you an American or not?
Right. Yeah. Right now, there seems to be a kind of looking for something to kick off the summer. There's something. Is it just some people have suggested this is an artificial construct of billionaire agitators who are funding. They're trying to do a sequel to the Summer of Love. Other people say no. This is something that we should expect a preview of a long term trend of these types of riotous behavior uh, patterns breaking out. What do you say? Do you think this is just a kind of astroturf phenomenon here by some billionaires looking to stir up trouble?
Well, there's no shortage of people with lots of money who are interested in destroying Donald Trump and destroying what we call the United States.
Right.
Let's be frank. There are large numbers out there who hate everything that this country stands for or has represented for the last 250 plus years. Now, who are they? And this is very important. I watched some discussion last night. I can't even remember what it was. Oh, I know. It was Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, who was boasting.
We have identified that man who was throwing bricks at the police cars. And we know who you are, and we're coming to get you.
Well, Pam, here's a real flash of the frigging obvious. He's just somebody that was paid a few bucks. They may have handed him $50 or $30 or whatever it was and said, throw bricks at the police cars. Who knows?
Yeah.
He's an irritant and a reprobate, fine. But he's not the problem. The problem is the person that provided the cell phones, the person that provided the biohazard masks, the person that provided the bricks and stones and other implements of violence. Who organized it? Now, the police have already picked up these cell phones and they've traced the owners back to Bel Air, Malibu, Beverly Hills,
Epstein Island.
yeah, Manhattan, the usual
Yeah.
collection of people that have long harbored nothing but hatred for the United States.
Yeah.
And my point is, let's go after them. Let's find out who they are
Yeah.
and prosecute them. It's not that I don't think this man should be prosecuted for throwing bricks and stones at police cars, but I think we need to understand that nothing that's happening right now is accidental. Nothing that's happening is necessarily spontaneous.
Yeah.
You're going to see terrible things orchestrated over the weekend because of the Army's 250th birthday. Now, Donald Trump decided he wanted to have a parade. That's fine. I think we should recognize the importance of the founding of the United States Army because before we became a nation, we were an army. And that army marched behind George Washington. And as long as it existed, we were a people that was
Yeah.
trying to become a nation. Now, we ought to recognize the criticality of the U.S. Army to our history, and we ought to celebrate it. We should celebrate the birth dates of other similar institutions, whether it's the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force. But they're turning this into some sort of violent attack on Donald Trump personally and on the nation that you and I are part of and love and care for. I listened to somebody who said, well, this is a terrible thing. We're going to have a military parade. They only do this in communist countries, right? I mean, utterly moronic statement. But there are people that think in those terms. Well, we must all be fascists if there's a military parade. There are very, very few people today who have lived in America long enough to know what America does and is. I remember as a child in the 50s and the 60s, virtually every Memorial Day there was some kind of parade. And there were usually observances of 11 November because it marked the end of the First World War. Everybody's father, excuse me, when I was growing up, had served in the Korean War or the Second World War.
Yeah.
In some cases, the First World War as well. This was commonplace. When it was the 4th of July or any major holiday, the American flags came out in abundance and everybody celebrated this. Somewhere along the line between 1965 and now, demographically, the country changed and attitudes inside the country changed because it was a concerted effort to undermine American national identity. And that has been an ongoing fight now for decades. We're now seeing all of this come together. And the people that are funding this well orchestrated, highly well designed, I would argue, what is it, protest against everything that you and I and others take for granted as being American and good on Saturday is being done by people that live in this country who hate us. Now, the question is why? Why would so many people with so much money who have benefited so much from the United States and its society be so determined to destroy it? I don't have an answer. Do you?
Yeah. No. I think it's maybe they want to make more money in the future, and America is a kind of the the rule of law, habeas corpus, the Constitutional Bill of Rights. All those things are probably in the way, and they need to remake America fundamentally into a whole nother country.
Well, the interesting thing is, and you brought up due process. There's a problem with the American Constitution. When the Constitution was written, there was no distinction made between the rights of U.S. citizens and non-U.S. citizens.
Yeah.
Well, it's not surprising. In 1789, when the Constitution was finally completed and passed into law, we didn't exactly anticipate Las Vegas, Miami, and any number of different places where people would come from overseas and visit. We didn't expect to be invaded from the South or from overseas. And so there wasn't much concern expressed about non-citizens. So what we have now is an attempt to insist that non-citizens, people who are not resident in this country, who don't necessarily have a right to be in this country, who in most cases came here breaking the law in the process of arriving here, somehow or another are supposed to be treated as though they were U.S. citizens.
Yeah.
Well, this is ridiculous. And this is another part of the problem. We realize the Constitution didn't make that distinction, but common sense dictates that we do, because we have, depending upon whose estimates you want to believe, roughly 50 million people inside the United States who are not legally here.
So you think it's not, you don't think it's 20 million, you think it's 50 million.
We think that it's close to 30 million that came over illegally under Biden.
Mm.
Biden effectively tore down, destroyed the border, suspended the rule of law, and admitted millions of people about whom we know absolutely nothing. So that of course has been an enormous problem. And some people say, oh, it's only 15 million. Others say it's 21 million. When I was down on the Texas border and I talked to people in the Border Patrol, and then I talked to people that are in Department of Homeland Security, they said, look, it's at least 30 million. Now, to that, you add another roughly 20 to 21 million who are here illegally already. So now you're up to 50 million. And a goal was obvious under the Biden administration and the people that ran that government. It was to flood us with so many people who were not Americans that it would make it very difficult for us to eject them, to compel them to leave. And in doing so, what would that do to us as Americans? Well, you're effectively saying that, so what if you're an American? You have to treat anybody who's here as though they were an American.
Mm-hmm.
They all have the same rights as you do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's ridiculous. You know, if an American is anything and anybody, what's the point of being an American?
Right.
In fact, I would go so far as to say if anything and anyone is an American, then there is no such thing as an American. And I think that's the goal behind all of this.
Yeah. Totally remake this whole concept of America. I wanted to turn to a video I saw today. Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, released about the warnings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. She went over there and showed the carnage of the atomic bombs that were dropped there, and then made a powerful plea and connected it to these much, much larger megaton nuclear weapons that are out there today that would be catastrophically higher in their ability to cause damage and suffering around the world, potentially creating a nuclear winter. She put that out, and I thought it was kind of different for, you know, I've never seen a DNI post a video like that, but a lot of the war hawks were really mad at her for doing that. But I do think that Donald Trump has shared that concern. He's talked about what he calls the N word, which is nuclear, and he always says it that way. And he warns that as being the biggest concern he has on his mind. And right now we live in a moment where we have Russia, we have Israel and Iran. The threat of nuclear strikes getting out of hand is ever great. So what did you think of that video if you saw it? Did you, any thoughts?
No, I haven't seen it. I think anything you do to enlighten the American people about the consequences of the use of a nuclear weapon is good. I think Americans need to be reminded of that. You know, the biggest problem we face in this country, and it's not just us, it's a problem, I think, to a large extent in Europe right now, is that people have forgotten what war really is.
Yeah.
You know, for us, war has become something that happens on somebody else's soil, not here. Well, they're wrong. I mean, war can come here. Tulsi Gabbard also pointed out a few months ago, very accurately, we have millions of people inside the country right now, many of whom are probably here to do us harm. We just don't know who they are because no one was vetted. No one cared. I mean, how many people here are agents for foreign powers? How many of them could be called upon as sleeper cells to do harm to us in the event of a conflict? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know those answers, but she's the director of national intelligence, and she rightly pointed this out. It's a serious problem. There's no question about it. Now, when it comes to war, we need to understand something else. After those two attacks, those nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were over, we launched the largest conventional firebombing offensive against Japan during the Second World War and ultimately did more damage and killed more people than were killed at Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So the notion that war that's not nuclear is somehow or another better
Yeah.
needs to go away. Today, the conventional munitions exist to do horrendous damage. And we need to understand that. You really need to look hard at what's happened in Ukraine and understand that you don't need a nuclear weapon to do that kind of damage.
Yeah. Are you pleased with the way in which President Trump is handling the peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia?
No, of course not. And I've been saying for months, I said this before he was elected in response to statements he made publicly, and I've been saying it ever since he was inaugurated. You want to end this war, the only way to end this quickly is for the United States to suspend all aid to the Ukrainians immediately. Number one, stop all aid to Ukraine. Now, I'm talking about military aid and assistance. I'm not talking about you want to send medical support, you want to send humanitarian aid, that's fine. But all military aid in all forms needs to stop. And then, secondly, all Americans inside that country need to be withdrawn. And then we need to turn to the Europeans and say, look, we're out. You know, how many times have we heard President Trump say, well, this is not my war. I didn't start this. Well, President Trump, I heard what you said. Now it's up to you to stop it. You don't stop it by calling people on the phone and either threatening them or urging them to love each other. You get out.
Mm-hmm.
He should have gotten us out the day after he was inaugurated. That should have been his top priority. He has always said, and he's right in this, Europeans have to be their own first responders. He's right, they do. But he also needs to get back on board where he was before he was elected. And he made it abundantly clear the Russians have no interest in conquering Europe. The Russians don't even want to cross the Dnieper River and go into Western Ukraine. If they do, it's because they figure they have no alternative or they'll never have any peace. And he knows that, and he needs to say that. He needs to put to bed the lies that Russia is hell-bent to conquer Europe. That's a lot of nonsense. The same people who insist that Russia wants to conquer Western Europe are the same people that said back in January, February, March 2022, oh, look at the Russian army. It's so weak. They can't do anything. But they present a threat to all of us because they want to conquer Europe. Now, you got to make your mind up. What are you dealing
Yeah.
with?
Yeah.
It's a lot of crap. And he needs just to stand up and put an end to it. And that's very easy. He can do that. But he hasn't done it.
He has said recently that this is like when you have two children fighting. Sometimes you just got to let them fight it out. They're not ready to settle their problems yet.
Well,
Is that
that's insulting to people. The issues are very complex.
Mhm.
The conflict between Russia and the people in Ukraine and in Kiev is a very complex matter. To say that this is similar to two children that don't get along diminishes the president. It
Mhm.
makes him look ridiculous. No one in Europe listens to that and thinks the man is intelligent. That's a very stupid thing to say.
Mhm.
You know, let's not pretend that this thing just happened a few years ago. The problems we're dealing with in Ukraine have deep roots. And Putin knows that, and the Ukrainians know it. So let's not pretend that this is some minor scrap, and if you wait long enough, it'll just end on its own.
Yeah. So in your opinion, the idea of his general point was sometimes people have to be ready for peace, and if they're not ready for peace, no matter what you say to them, it's not going to get done. Do you sense that Russia and Ukraine are just not ready for peace? They need to fight for a lot longer.
No, not at
Yeah.
all. I think that this war is the last thing the Russians wanted. If you go back into December and January, where the Russians sent us a number of proposals about how to rectify the security situation in the region, we answered by saying that we saw no legitimate Russian national security interests in Ukraine or anywhere else. We essentially told the Russians, the hell with you. You have
Mhm.
no right to protect yourselves. You just need to shut up and color and put up with whatever we do in Ukraine. In the meantime, we built up Ukraine into this monster.
Yeah.
We ran a coup in 2014 and established a government that was anti-Russian, that was designed to drag Ukraine into NATO, and
Right.
then ultimately to operate as a battering ram against Russia on our behalf. We waged war against Russia using the lives of millions of Ukrainians, and we've done an excellent job of killing millions of them. At least 1.5 million Ukrainian soldiers are dead. And then you have the audacity in some cases of people in the Senate, like Lindsey Graham and others, that say, well, we've killed at least 100,000 Russians. That's good. What kind of nonsense is that? Why do we have an interest in seeing Russian lives destroyed, let alone Ukrainian lives? We have no interest in any of it. We have no history of any strategic interest in Ukraine whatsoever, least of all in eastern Ukraine. What are we doing there? Well,
Yeah.
let's go back and look at the people that ran the coup. Who are they? Who are these people that have been driving us to war against Russia? Who are they in the Senate and the House? These people should be brought up on charges of treason against the American people. The
Yeah.
American people don't want to fight in Ukraine. Hello? Nobody does. No one in Europe wants to fight in Ukraine. I'm so sick of listening to this Dutchman, Rutte, who talks about getting ready to fight a war. Let's get all of these ferocious Dutchmen that want to join the new European army that's going to march into Ukraine. They can saddle up along with the Frenchmen, the Brits, and everybody else in the region that wants to go to war in Ukraine. And then we'll get all 50 of them on one bus and drive them east. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is absurd. This is nonsense. We're supposed to be the adults in the room.
Yeah.
We're not. We should have said this is ridiculous. There's no interest in this. We don't want it. But instead, what have we done? We're paralyzed. President Trump has been paralyzed. He can't even control the Senate or the House. These people are running over to Ukraine, posturing, having their pictures taken, uh, promising more money, more equipment, more technology, and cheering the deaths of Russians. This is insane.
Mhm.
Makes no sense.
Do you think Lindsey Graham or and those people are behind that latest Ukrainian attack on the bombers of Russia?
Well, listen, I don't think they're behind a specific attack. Or Richard Blumenthal, the Marine reservist who was never in Vietnam but said he was. These people are just opportunists. They're benefiting from various lobbies that are willing to pay them to say and do the things they do. Uh, Washington has become a putrid cesspool of corruption. And I think Americans are increasingly aware of it. They just don't know what to do about it.
Yeah.
And I think their hope was that President Trump would march into this and behave differently. Well, he hasn't. This is the man who said he wanted to end all these endless conflicts overseas. What's he done? He hasn't. Instead, we listen to people talk about going to war with China. I mean, I can't conceive of anything dumber than that. I mean, how you're going to go to war with 1.4 billion people, 7,000 miles from our shores, and you think you have a snowball's chance in hell of winning against them? I mean, it's just stupid. I mean, every time we decide we don't like someone, we have any sort of dispute, whether it's economic or fiscal or financial, whatever it happens to be, we want to bomb them.
Yeah.
This is insane. When in doubt, bomb. This has got to stop. We all thought that President Trump understood this, but he's turned out to be run over by the war lobby, along with the Israel lobby and every other lobby except the lobby that exists for the American people. And he's supposed to be the chief lobbyist for the American people. Where is he?
So the one guy they keep throwing out there that seems to be pushing back against the Warhawks to some degree is Steve Witkoff. They keep mentioning his name. If you were in the room with Steve Witkoff with these negotiations, what do you think you get? What do you give to Ukraine and Russia to get them to agree to stop this? You know,
Steve Witkoff, I'm sure, is a nice man. He's an intelligent person, and he's obviously made lots of money in real estate, along with all of Donald's friends. But no one in Russia takes him seriously. I don't think anybody in the Middle East does. This is not how you do business. You pick a seasoned diplomat, preferably someone with experience in the region. You don't pick someone who's just a businessman that you like and trust and send him everywhere. What does Steve Witkoff know about Ukraine and Russia?
yeah,
What does he really know about the Middle East?
yeah,
I mean, this is stupid.
yeah,
I don't blame Witkoff for anything. I think he's done the best job he could do for his friend.
yeah.
But I don't think he was ever able to do very much because I don't think President Trump's really being in charge.
Hmm.
You know, and during these Iranian talks with the Iranians about nuclear weapons and so forth, uh, in the last round of talks, they thought they had an agreement where the Iranians would be allowed to enrich uranium for purely civil purposes, in other words, nuclear power or medical purposes. And I think that was 3.2 or 3.3%, whatever the enrichment was, far below what is required to build a nuclear weapon. And suddenly it all stopped. They thought they had an agreement, and President Trump says, no, no enrichment at all. And somebody made the comment, said, well, you know, we could all have an agreement and go home and forget about this, except for the Bibi effect. Well, what's the Bibi effect? Netanyahu picks up the phone and calls the Israel lobby and all of his agents and says, no, must be nothing. There could be nothing there. He wants the Libya model, of course. He wants to reduce Iran to poverty and ashes if he can do it. He's demanded that all of their long range or medium range ballistic missiles be dismantled, which leaves Iran naked in the face of Israeli threats. And he wants Israel to be the preeminent nuclear power, the only nuclear power in the region, so that the Israelis can continue to bully their neighbors at will. I mean, this is crazy. But I think the Iranian who made the comment, talked about the Bibi effect, was right. The Bibi effect is real. Sorry, unacceptable, Donald. Go back. And now recently, I think it was just in the last few hours, the president spoke, and he said, well, we tried, but they just can't enrich anything. And there are other things they have to give up, and they won't give them up. So there's nothing I can do. So that means, I guess, there's going to be a war.
They have such contempt for American lives, though. Bibi will let them be killed over in the Middle East. Some of our soldiers as a bait to get us to draw more of our people into their region to because in Bibi's mind he's a superior human being to our children, so he would be glad to see subhuman scum die for his needs. Right? That seems to be the general sentiment that he's expressed, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan, whatever it is. He's a supremacist, and he deserves to have full right to rule, and he'll get us to send our children as the sacrificial lamb as needed. That's his prerogative.
It is very difficult if you've told all of your neighbors in the region that they are subhuman
Yeah,
to then get along with your neighbors.
yeah,
But I think the real issue here is not Netanyahu. The issue is President Trump. Now, Biden was an immense disappointment. Biden did absolutely nothing.
yeah.
That's why he's widely referred to as Genocide Joe. Well, all of the genocidal behavior in Israel could be stopped with a phone call. You simply call up and say, "I'm suspending all military aid to Israel until action against the people in Gaza is ended."
Yeah.
Has anybody done that? No. Why not? Well, obviously they're afraid to do that. Why are they afraid to do that? That's what Americans should ask. Why?
His big beautiful bill vote tally is probably tied up to his support to obey Netanyahu, though. You know what I mean? Think about that. How much the Senate collapse 70,000 times whenever he goes and addresses the joint session, you know. So you can imagine how many of those votes that he needs. He's already in a pickle right now with some of the holdouts. He'd be in a lot bigger problem probably if he signaled that he was going to disobey Bibi on this, right? That seems to be what's going on. And then he would have nothing. He would have no border. You know, he wouldn't have any of the things that he wanted to run on midterm reelection on. He'd just be a disaster. So that's probably what he's dealing with.
People in the Senate and the House are far more concerned about ensuring that their donors from the Israel lobby and other lobbies are happy than they are about whether or not we have law and order in the United States.
Yeah.
They don't seem to be concerned about whether or not we've actually secured the border. And we know that the border now is partially secure, but it's not completely secure because the illegal human trafficking and drug trafficking and passage of money and other things back and forth through the legal crossing points continues without interruption, for the simple reason that the drug cartels can buy everybody on the border, which is one of the reasons you've got to get the U.S. Army on the border. And we have to rotate troops in and out of those places until we have a better system set up, because the longer they're there, the more likely they are to be bought by the cartels.
Yeah.
So you want to limit the amount of time that people are exposed to the cartels. Nobody seems to care about that. That doesn't seem to be a top priority. What are we concerned about in Washington? We seem to think that whatever we do is not going to be challenged. In other words, that we are this superpower with more of everything than everyone else. Well, we're not.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those days are over. This is not 1991, where everyone else is essentially in ruins. This is 2025, and we are one of several major powers in both economic as well as military terms. It's very dangerous. And what people don't realize in the United States is increasingly around the world, across Asia, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Southwest Asia, Latin America, we have become patient zero. Now, what do I mean by patient zero? Patient zero is the first person that contracted the plague. That person is isolated and kept away from everybody, lest he escape and suddenly cause everyone everywhere to die of the plague. Well, we're patient zero internationally. Nobody wants to fight with us because nobody wants a war. I mean, this is the big joke. We keep talking about we've got to be prepared to go to war with China. China's not interested in war.
Yeah.
These are about business. Nobody in Asia buys this. Hegseth went over to Asia and gave this speech in front of everyone and said, we all have to pull together and defeat China. What? People looked at it like you're out of your mind. We are seen as this destabilizing, dangerous force that, given the opportunity, will cause war and destruction all over the world. So people are moving away from us.
Yeah.
You know, if you look financially, you have a similar phenomenon. People are trying to get out from under our debt. They're selling off our treasuries. They're walking away from us. Just as before I came on, I was reading a note that was sent to me. The Japanese, for the first time in years, are buying Russian oil. Now, we've tried to stop Russian oil from reaching anybody anywhere. That's failed miserably. The Indians buy huge quantities of it, and then they refine it. In fact, one of the largest refineries in the world is in India, and it's owned by a Russian firm. Well, right now, you have the same phenomenon with Japan. Japan has said, I have a 260% debt to GDP ratio. I'm going to trade with the Russians. I need to trade it. I need the energy.
Yeah.
We've got to get out of this business of constantly threatening, embargoing, and tariffing everyone in sight.
Yeah.
It's a dead end.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't seem like much has changed between the administrations on a lot of the fundamental issues that are threatening the country's survival. So it'll be interesting to see if any of these things have a breakthrough. But I remain very skeptical. I mean, for example, do you believe that they would actually go to a hot war with Iran? I don't think Trump wants it. There's no political will for that. I mean, what's he going to do? Is he going to just play a game with Iran, say, hey, can you just let us strike these two things and you can strike this of ours and we'll call it even and get Bibi off our back?
Anyone who's spent any time with Donald Trump knows very well that he does not want war with anyone.
Yeah.
But
He doesn't have the stomach to do a George W. either, like
yeah,
Iraq.
but does it make any difference?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the man that said, "This is not my war in Ukraine. I don't want it." But he can't seem to disengage from it.
Yeah.
He can't seem to simply say, "That's it, we're out."
Because
Why?
the personnel doesn't execute what he wants. That's what they
Well,
did with Syria, right?
if people are not executing, it's because they're unafraid of him.
Yeah.
You know, Eisenhower gave some brilliant advice to JFK that JFK initially did not follow when he became president. And JFK initially did not like President Eisenhower. And so after the inauguration was over, he walked over to Eisenhower and he said, "Well, General, do you have any last bit of advice for me?" And he said, "Yes, be a good butcher." And JFK sort of said, "Well, what are you talking about?" He said, "People will disobey you. People will be disloyal to you. If they are, you must immediately remove them, fire them, get them out. And if you don't have the stomach for it, you'd better find somebody else who can do it for you." Well, eventually, that's what JFK did. He cleaned out the CIA after the Bay of Pigs. He was about to clean out the senior leadership of the armed forces after his experience with the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, these things are real problems. They're not new. And if the President of the United States does not act decisively to crush people who disobey him, who are disloyal to him, or simply ignore him, then you end up where Donald Trump was in his first term.
Yeah. And
And
you were
I'm
there.
afraid he's back there.
You were there in that first term, and you had tried to execute his plans for withdrawing from Afghanistan, right? Also, Syria. Were you involved with the
Yes.
Syria policy?
Like he wanted to remove all the U.S. forces, not just from Afghanistan, but ultimately from Iraq and Syria as well.
Wow.
And
So
he
what's
had
that
given,
like? Everybody sees the big picture of the president says we don't want to be there, and then nothing happens. So you were in the section that says nothing happens. So what's that like? Can you give us an insight?
yeah, it's where you have political figures and senior military figures who all rush over to the White House and say, "Mr. President, you can't do this. You can't do this because if you do this, this will upset the allies. This will upset the flow of money. This will disrupt everything that we're doing." Well, if you're Eisenhower, you say, "I gave you an order, execute it, and get the hell out of my office." Donald Trump didn't do that. Donald Trump said, "Oh, okay, then what can I do?" Look, you can't do business that way. Now, you have to be sure that you are issuing orders in a very strict, coherent fashion. They have to make sense. The military will always push back against anything that changes what's happening because that's the nature of the senior officers. "Well, we've always done it that way, Mr. President." Well, I don't care if you've always done it that way. It needs to stop now.
But when he puts in someone like you, doesn't that give him a little bit of confidence to say, well, Macgregor says we can do it, or did they already like isolate you? How does that work?
You have to understand that I was not confirmed by the Senate.
Okay.
If you're not confirmed by the Senate in a position, your authority is really quite limited.
Okay.
There's very little you can do. So the president can do whatever he wants, to be blunt. He really can. He has enormous authority, particularly regarding defense and foreign policy. He is the principal source of power and authority. He has a lot of power domestically. If a senator or a congressman don't want to go along with something that he thinks is very important, a bill that he wants to pass, well, he can simply turn to his congressional liaison and say, "Let them know that we're going to shut down Camp Swampy that's in the congressman's district. And by the way, I'm prepared to cancel the following contracts with the various corporate firms that have businesses in the state." In other words, there are a lot of things that you can do that you don't have to advertise publicly, but you can make damn sure people understand that if you're not going to do what I want you to do, you're going to pay a hell of a price. And that price is going to hurt your constituents. It's going to hurt the people where you live. And they're going to be angry, not with the president, but with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is an old story. This has been going on forever.
Yeah.
But I never saw any evidence that President Trump really understood that.
Well, I appreciate your time, Colonel Macgregor. It's always great having you on. Do you think this time next year there will still be an ongoing war with Russia and Ukraine, or do you think it'll be resolved by then, a year from now?
I think that right now there's a discussion in Moscow where they're trying to determine just what to do next. I think that they had hoped that by now this regime in Kiev would have given up and been willing to negotiate. I think they figured out these people aren't rational and they don't care about Ukraine and they don't give a damn how many people are killed. Their job, per their original backing from us and from the West Europeans, is to make life miserable for Russia. And they don't care if it costs 2, 3, 4 million Ukrainian lives. So I think the question now is, well, we can't win this war with missile strikes and rockets alone. So that means, do we go into Kiev? Do we crush this regime, root it out once and for all? Do we cross the Dnieper River? Do we take Odessa and turn rump Ukraine into a landlocked country? I mean, these are the questions that I think are under discussion.
Yeah.
Because I think they've begun to understand that that's the only way to end the conflict, to
Yeah.
really put a stop to it.
Yeah. And then there's going to be tremendous pressure on Trump to fight back in that scenario, but it'll be interesting to see. Yeah.
Well, he should do what he said he was prepared to do a few weeks ago, which is wash his hands of the whole thing and walk out.
Yeah.
But what have we seen? Nothing. It's just, I know President Trump doesn't want a war in the Middle East,
Yeah.
but he sits there and says, well, there's no agreement with Iran.
Yeah.
And people
Well-
say, well, Mr. President, you promised a war if there was no agreement with Iran. What are you going to do now? And he sort of sits there meekly.
Yeah.
Not good.
I appreciate your time, sir. Thank you for coming on.
All right. Thank you, David. Bye-bye.
Like a